Hello and welcome to the Hoop Collective. We talk about the NBA. Today we want to give a little checkup to the Dallas Mavericks, who have had a great regular season, great postseason, and a bit of a turbulent offseason here. And joining me to talk about it is, of course, Tim Bontemps, joining us from New York.
Well, Brian.
And joining us from Luka's winter home in Dallas is Dan MacMahon.
Howdy, partners.
MacMahon, you know Luka well. You cover him every day. You've been on the Mavericks for years. Luka gave an interview to a Spanish publication recently. What was in that interview, and what did you take away from it?
Yeah, and I believe the pronunciation of the publication is Marca. This is when Luka's on his he's on a kind of a European Jordan tour. And it was a brief interview, but there's a couple things that kind of got Mavs Twitter a bit of flutter, I would say. And so it was an interview in Spanish. So these are rough translations, but there were two things. One, he was asked basically, hey, can you win in Dallas, or do you see yourself, playing elsewhere at some point? And essentially his answer there was his plan, his goal is to stay in Dallas and win there. Of course, in the future, nothing's known, but reiterated that, the idea and the hope is to win in Dallas. And then he was asked about the Mavericks offseason. And he said, well, the market has but just started, and I expect the bosses of Dallas have more options to sign. Let's see what they do. And again, that's Spanish to English translation, and nothing too inflammatory there. But I do think if you're Luka, who, by the way, they seek his input, but he's not heavily involved in personnel decisions. He has not shown interest in being heavily involved. He's spends much of his offseason in Europe. He's been playing with Slovenian national team again this summer. He's not a guy who has shown the desire to be a recruiter. But you're looking at that. You're in Luka's new Jordan signature shoes, and you're saying, okay, we just lost our second best player for nothing with Jalen Brunson going to New York. Took a swing at Christian Wood, who's talented, but man, in that deal, we gave up my best friend, like Boban. Like, that's the dude I hang out with all the time. Boban's gone now. Okay, well, hey, the front office knows how much I love Goran Dragic. We'll probably at least get him on the roster. Nope. Dragic goes to Chicago, and in an interview with Slovenian media, Dragic basically said the Mavericks made him an offer, but made it clear, hey, you're not really going to play much. And he said, I'm not ready to retire and be a cheerleader, something along those lines. Igor Kososkov, who was obviously has deep roots with Luka, was the Slovenian national team coach when they won Eurobasket 5 years ago, came to Dallas. Like when you saw Luka, you saw him with Boban, with Igor. Igor went to Brooklyn. They're both gone. So he doesn't really have a confidant in Dallas anymore.
That's sort of quasi-famous photo during the playoffs when people saw him outside enjoying an adult beverage was with Igor Kokoskov.
And Boban.
And Boban. He was there. He was his, hangout buddies.
And by the way, the hilarious thing about that was people thought, because it came out the day of a playoff, came out like the afternoon of, I forgot which game, but a playoff game, a Western Conference Finals game. And so people really said, oh my gosh, Luka's having a beer at lunch. What's going on? Is he going to play drunk? Whatever. And so I think it was like TMZ hits the Mavericks up, and the Mavericks told TMZ that picture is not from today. And they kind of were like, scoffed. And so then TMZ puts out, oh, it's an old photo. And it was a photo from the night before. Not that having a beer at dinner is the end of the world, but whatever.
It wasn't from that day, MacMahon. Come on.
It wasn't from that day. It was an ice cold beverage. It did look like a light beer from the night before. But to your point, he was with Boban.
You would also know what light beers look like too.
I'm very familiar with the concept. But I don't get any kind of sense of panic though from Mavericks management. And just to kind of go back, yes, they absolutely wanted to keep Jalen Brunson, but once it became clear that the Knicks were putting that kind of money on the table, they didn't try to outbid. Like that was beyond what they were not just comfortable, but anywhere remotely willing to go to. And so kind of their spin / hope is, okay, we're getting a Hardaway back that can replace much, if not all, of the scoring. Christian Wood can replace some of the scoring. They, the one other than Christian Wood, the one significant addition that they made was they signed JaVale McGee to give Luka that, big roll threat, lob threat. Their ideas, they wanted a rim protector, they wanted a rebounder. JaVale McGee was recruited with the promise that he would start. That he told me that the day that he agreed to the deal, that has been confirmed by the Mavericks. Now, just because he starts doesn't mean he's playing quote unquote starter minutes. He's still probably going to play about 20 minutes per game. I'll tell you one thing I am fascinated, and I don't think it's quite clear at this point, is whether Christian Wood is starting at the 4 or coming off the bench. If he's starting at the 4, I think it's an awkward fit. If he's coming off the bench, I think that could be very, very interesting for a guy in a contract year who considers himself to be a star player. So let's keep our eyes on that. And look, it's not like you have to commit to a starting lineup for 82 games. These things are flexible, but that one will be interesting. But, the Mavericks going to the West Finals, obviously, you're happy to make that kind of a deep playoff run, kind of indicates to Luka that you do have a chance to compete here. Wasn't a very impressive showing in the West Finals. I think that kind of made it clear, hey, there's still a pretty big gap between the Mavericks and a championship. But coming off of that, Mavericks management kind of, they weren't getting ahead of themselves. They still felt like, listen, we can be even a better team next year and not necessarily go as deep in the playoffs, because there's a lot of teams in the West that should be significantly better next year. And you start with the obvious: the Clippers getting Kawhi back, the Nuggets getting Murray and Porter back. And so the Mavericks didn't go into this offseason thinking, hey, we're just a tweak or two away. They did have kind of a patient approach, feeling like it's going to probably take 2 or 3 years for us to be able to put the kind of roster in place that we need to be a long-term championship contender.
I'm sure that makes Luka very happy. I have a question. Why did the Mavericks not swallow their frustration and go ahead and do a sign and trade with the Knicks for Brunson? Because at the very least, they could have gotten back. We see that the way the Knicks structured the contract, they could have generated a $27 million traded player exception, a trade exception to use going forward. That would be like an asset. Now, it would probably have cost them something, likely a second-round pick at the very least. But there was obviously some frustration about the way the Knicks went about the Jalen Brunson recruitment, so to speak. But why not get over that and find a deal there so that you could have that asset to improve your team going forward?
That was not due to a lack of willingness on the Mavericks' part. I'll say that. The Mavericks were willing to go the sign and trade route, and it just didn't happen. The Knicks didn't need to get it done, and it ended up.
I heard that they wanted an asset from the Knicks as opposed to the other way around.
Well, that very well could be true.
Which really would indicate they weren't interested in doing it, because that's not how those sign and trades work.
Well, and I'll say this:
work by you saying, "Hey, if you allow us to do a sign and trade, we'll give you a second and we get a trade exception." That's how it works.
I will say this: when it became clear, several days before the Knicks ever met with Jalen Brunson, when it became clear that they were going over $100 million, the Mavs knew right then, we're out. And at the time, the thought was, but if they want to pay him that much, they're going to need to clear space. And hey, we'll be willing to talk, sign, and trade, and perhaps get a pick in the process. Soon thereafter, the Knicks like, nah, we don't need you. We've got Detroit here. We don't need to give up a first rounder at all. Again, the Mavs, when it became clear they were going to lose Brunson, at first they were optimistic that they could get a nice asset in return for helping clear the cap space. That wasn't necessary. And then when the Knicks didn't need them, it just, I don't know exactly how those talks went, but it didn't work out.
Look, I don't know. I wasn't inside the front office. I wasn't inside the negotiations. I don't know how it went, but for the Mavericks not even to get an exception on that and let Jalen Brunson go literally for nothing, that's just a very hard pill to swallow. And then I will bring this up. This is, and I'm not saying that Luka would comment on this in a Spanish interview. It's been 8 years now since the Mavericks have paid the luxury tax.
They will this year.
Okay. When that happens, I will see it.
True.
Obviously, their team is getting a lot more expensive. We've talked
about they're currently in the tax by about 10 or 12 million, but we'll see if like you said, we'll see if they end up there.
Yeah. So, if we're now getting into Luka championship contention years here. I mean, if you read the Western Conference.
And this is where I want to jump in, because to me, this Mavericks team looks a hell of a lot like the Cleveland Cavaliers circa 2006 or 7. There is not young talent on this roster. They're out draft picks. They are pretty much stuck cap wise. Like, they can maybe eventually get some salary cap space, but this is not a group going forward. You look at it and say, yeah, this is a team that should be in championship contention. To your point, MacMahon, to me, Dallas could very well be a play-in team next year. Yeah. They just let a guy walk who they could have re-signed. They repeatedly chose not to extend for a very good number during the season, completely butchered the negotiations on it. Even if you don't think he's worth what they paid and they shouldn't have re-signed him this summer, they sure as hell should have signed him in January for the extension that he was willing to sign for, and they didn't do. So you look at where Dallas is at, to me, it's hard for me to see how this team is going to be a real contender over the next 2-3 years. And let's say 3 years from now, that has Luka Doncic with 1 year left on his contract with a team that is probably, at least as it looks right now, not going to be a contending team. That to me is where this is.
Well, I don't want to look too far into the future, but we can just look into the future for this year.
No. I think you have to look into the future.
You have to have a big picture view.
Yeah. When you have Luka, look at where we've spent the last 2 weeks talking about Kevin Durant with 4 years left on his deal, saying it's time for me to go. We have Donovan Mitchell, 3 years left on his deal, being put in trade discussions and likely being traded. I'm not saying Luka Doncic is going to ask out of Dallas, but if we're in the territory, like you said, he's on his second contract. Unrestricted free agency is on the clock. And right now, if you're work for the Mavs or you're a fan of the Mavs, how do you look at this situation and say, here's the path to this team being a championship level team? Here's the path to getting a second star to play with Luka Doncic, the championship caliber player. It's just, they made their swing at Kristaps Porzingis. That didn't work. Jalen Brunson was a nice second round pick that developed. They then butchered negotiations. He leaves in free agency for nothing. They don't even get a trade exception for him. I would be pretty discouraged right now if I'm a Mavs fan about the direction of this team.
Well, obviously the best thing you've got going is you have a bona fide MVP candidate who is 23 years old.
No question.
Now, and we talked about this after the Porzingis trade. You've got two cars going down the highway. One is, hey, is there going to be another player who tries to force his way to Dallas via trade? Two is, hey, is Luka going to get frustrated a few years from now and decide, I want out. Again, the fact they went to the West Finals helps, but if that's the peak a few years down the road, that's problematic. I will say there are things you can look at with Luka that do show that he is naturally a very loyal person. For example, the fact he's playing with the Slovenian national team, not just that he plays with them every summer, when he can play in a World Cup qualifier, Euro basket, obviously Olympic stuff, all that. But the fact he's playing with them at all, because he could have played for Spain, he could have played for Serbia. He, both those countries desperately wanted him. He wanted to play for. His
I will say
country.
that is amazing because Serbia and Spain are two teams that could win the gold medal with him.
Yeah.
And I mean, Slovenia.
Hell, he almost won the gold
bronze.
medal almost won the gold medal with Slovenia.
Well, they almost won the bronze. They lost in the bronze medal game.
I'm saying he got him into the medal round. Like he got Slovenia into the medal round. Now, and just the one thing I will add to go back to my comments before, they could potentially have a ton of salary cap space in 2 years in 2024, which I'm sure is what Dallas fans or Dallas front office people would immediately yell at me and say, in 2 years, we got a ton of salary cap space. We could surround Luka with players. That's true, but we've seen Dallas many times in the past have a star in Dirk Nowitzki, future Hall of Famer, have a ton of cap space, go into free agency expecting to sign guys and get left holding the bag. And if they get left holding the bag in 2 years, then it's really danger time.
So a couple things. Number one, let me just make the point that while I just laid out that Luka does have very loyal tendencies to rely on just unwavering faith from him and think, hey, we got 21 years out of Dirk. No, that ain't it. As far as the Mavericks' previous free agency failures, epic failures, this is a new general manager in Nico Harrison, who one of the really attractive things about hiring him was he's a longtime Nike executive who has deep relationships with everybody, with players, with agents throughout basketball, not just players and agents, but in terms of free agency, that's what we're talking about there. And let's just be straight up. Stars did not want to play for Rick Carlisle. Jason Kidd is a guy who these guys relate to. He has a lot of relationships with them. So I think it's different, but I also think, the old, hey, create cap space, like Mavericks fans cringe when they hear that. If you say dry powder and around a Mavericks fan, or keep your powder dry, they cringe hearing that. That's an old Donnie Nelson phrase. And Wendy, when you talked about, we'll see if they're paying tax, I'll say this. The Mavericks still owe a pick, top 10 protected pick this year from Porzingis. If they give up a future first round pick to shed salary, that is a disaster.
Well,
you
okay,
cannot do that.
I'm just saying,
and not do that and look Luka in his eye and say, we're trying to win.
I'm not saying they're going to do that, to be clear. I'm saying this is an organization that has a reputation for being aggressive, but that isn't the reality. The reality is they have not been aggressive in spending for a while now.
Yeah, they have not paid tax since they won a title.
Yeah, and they're on the clock. I mean, and you're right. Like, Jason Kidd is a guy stars really respect. Nico Harrison, as you mentioned, has tons of relationships throughout the league. But they better follow through on that plan, because they don't, even if a star tries to force his way to Dallas, they don't really have the ammo to get a star in that.
Which is exactly why they can't give up ammo to shed salary. They've got to keep what they
100%,
have.
100%.
Which is exactly why they should have done
which
is exactly why they should have tried to get a trade exception.
And look at what happened. And just one last thing. Look at the guy that Luka was traded for on draft night, Trae Young, right? 2021, the Hawks make the conference finals, surprise run, upset the number 1 seed in the second round. Everybody's feeling great in Atlanta. They actually added a little bit last summer, thinking, all right, we got a chance to be a real good team. Then they come back and they disappoint. They're in the play-in tournament. Everybody's frustrated. Now they're making moves around the roster. Like, the fact that Dallas got here, like, if they fall back into the play-in tournament this year, like, I don't think Luka's going to be like, oh, yeah, we're on a good, like, long-term 4-year plan. We're going to get guys in 2 years. It's going to be great. Like, guy wants to win games. So it's a situation to watch.
And the Mavs front office feels that urgency, but doesn't want to make panic moves that essentially handcuff them from getting where they need to be.
All right, we'll see how it plays out. Thank you for watching the Hoop Collective. You can listen to us wherever you get your podcasts every Tuesday and Friday, or watch us right here on ESPN's YouTube channel.
Thanks for watching ESPN on YouTube. For live streaming sports and premium content, subscribe to ESPN+.